Levi Spears again, Global Technology Office, focused around cloud and virtualization. We're going to cover the Orchestrated Cloud Disaster Recovery feature. This is a solution that can augment your IDPA 4400, the SMB solution. It also works with and integrates with the broader portfolio. Okay? To your ask, this is expected to help address customers who are being told that their secondary site is disappearing. They now have to do DR to the cloud. They have to use AWS. They're going to eventually have to use things like Azure as a target for disaster recovery. They need a cost-effective way to do that with some flexibility, ideally with some orchestration, planning, things like that. So we'll go through the technical slide, and we'll also talk about and have a short demo talking about our direct flow into VMware Cloud on AWS that we're releasing as well. So from a use case perspective, thinking about extending the value prop of the IDPA or Dell EMC data protection, leveraging cost-effective S3 storage with minimal orchestration components running in the cloud until such time as you need to do test or failover, or if you're doing failback operations, giving you very quick and efficient fail-in and fail-back operations, an intuitive UI for that, the ability to set up DR plans, the ability to pre-stage certain workloads if we do need to get rapid recovery instead of a wider RPO RTO that we might address with a read and conversion process for the virtual machine workloads. And then from an efficiency perspective, again, taking advantage of our deduplication efficiency, incremental forever capabilities from protection to minimize the daily transport workload that has to go out there to give you that recoverability in the cloud, as well as giving you minimal footprint, that's going to hit you from an OpEx perspective, both ingress, egress, the storage capacity required, and the resources required to run that. Okay? Available again, obviously with the IDPA as an additive license, as we talked about, based on your targeted capacity in public cloud. The ability for you now to do application consistent and aware recovery into the AWS footprint, and there are some additional components required for that, but we'll talk about that. And then finally, the ability for us to do direct recovery into VMware Cloud. This is a new addition. And in contrast to the items that you see over here on the left side, where we're obviously having to do translation between an on-premise vSphere environment and AWS, eventually Azure, we have the capability, of course, with VMware Cloud, where we have a native vSphere environment under the hood that we can work with, and we eliminate the need for translation, and instead can do direct recovery into that footprint. From an orchestration perspective, capability to take your on-premise backups, define policies, and set a flag within your policy for data protection that these resources will need to be recovered into the cloud. Okay? At that point, in the back end, the orchestration begins to get your images loaded, and then from a go-forward perspective on a nightly basis, daily basis, as your backup operation is complete, we're going to go ahead and push those incremental changes out, ensure that you have a fully recoverable copy of that virtual machine workload in public cloud ready to go. And again, the ability for you to even accelerate that further in the AWS instance, being able to pre-stage an AMI based on a conversion of that VM and being ready to launch. So instead of having a select and begin my failover and fail-in operation, I've now got to get the VM workload converted to native AWS. I instead can have pre-staged AMIs. The trade-off there is I'm trying to get a tighter RPO RTO at the storage cost incurred by those AMIs. Right? From an architecture perspective, an augmentation of the IDPA stack. You have a lightweight virtual appliance that is going to run on-premise in your VMware environment. It's going to become your broker so that we can map resources from a virtualization protection perspective. The policies that you're working with, your vCenter resources that you're protecting. We're going to use that both for the brokering. It is also your deployment engine to drive the AWS configuration. You have a VPC. You stand up your CDRA, you have your authentication back into the public cloud to create the instance for command and control, identify the S3 bucket that you're going to use for storage, and from that point forward, the operation flows from those policies, right? So initial setup, very straightforward, quick. Once you have that in place, we get seeding done. There's going to be a certain amount of time required to move that first workload, and then once we have that in place, we maintain and incrementally update that as needed.
Okay, so that's another VM not integrated into the appliance.
Incorrect. So on the appliance side, that component is integrated in. This is looking at it from a traditional aspect.
Yeah.
Right. If once the machine is there,
yes,
it's being incrementally updated, does it at some point go into Glacier as well for long-time storage? Is there an option to do that?
In terms of tiering the backup images into cooler storage or something like that?
Yeah.
So today, we're targeting just S3 as the location. In terms of tiering out into infrequent access or moving down into Glacier, right? Those type of use cases, what we're seeing in general is that with the efficiency we're getting, compression, incremental storage, when you look into retrieval costs, maintenance, management, et cetera, the lack of deduplication and things like that that you're getting out into a Glacier environment, there's a cost trade-off there that we haven't seen the economies of scale on that yet. Okay?
And retrieving deduplicated data from Glacier gets ugly.
Correct.
Just the,
And it comes down to, if you know absolutely you got cold archive footprint that you're just literally locking away to never touch again, right? That use case makes sense. When I talk about backup data, which when I look at this, I'm still doing command and control and retention operations and cleanup. I'm going to expire images at a certain point, things like that. Then I'm going to be in a situation, this is again for DR, right?
Yeah.
The long-term retention piece would be something that you would use with, for example, Cloud Tier.
No, the reason for the question was exactly that some companies I know about in the past
Right.
that want to keep some of their data or images for long term,
Right.
for compliance reasons or whatever reasons they may have.
Right.
And for that use case, I was thinking that if there is an option to actually at some point take a snapshot of that machine, or not snapshot technically, but whichever state it's in,
Right.
and move into long-term storage.
Right. And so again, today in the workflow, not included at this point. It's something that we're going to continue to evaluate, right? Because the focus here, like I said, is that DR purpose, right? Short-term recovery.
And to your point, that's more of, hey, this is now long-term retention. We have a legal hold. We need to hold on to it indefinitely. This is, hey, I want to do a failover, failback. So I'm not going to be doing it from a copy that's a year old. This is more recent ones that I want to do that fail. So
Of course.
different use cases, but that's a very valid point. And that's why it's what are we trying to address?
Yeah, and nice to have that option if for example, for some companies.
And that's really where the cloud sharing comes into play, right? And being able to look at it from that perspective. So it's what are we trying to solve? And then on top of it too, to Levi's point, is it more of should we just send it right out to that S3 or to that Glacier bucket because now it's cold archive and we don't want to touch it ever again and we're decommissioning it from production storage. So there's different things that you need to look to address. And it's not one size fit all because then you end up trying to make something work that shouldn't, so.
well, that's always true with one size fits all.
The VM conversion process, is that part of the replication or is that part of the failover?
So that's a couple of options. Part of the failover, if you are going for that wider RTO and trying to absolutely minimize cost in the cloud. If you instead want to have the conversion process ready and pre-staged and updated on a daily basis, then again, at the cost of that additional AMI storage, it can be just an extension of the policy where we set those images as a part of the policy that this is going to be pre-staged and ready to go. And you'll have in the UI, a clickable actual link into that AMI to do launch if you need to do, or you can also consume as a part of our more advanced DR test plans that we've implemented with the new release of code. This supports, again, efficient protection into the cloud, ideally minimal footprint in the cloud until such time that I need to do fail-in. I have capability to do test and validation fail-in operations that are under command and control of your solution. If the lights go out, we have complete ability to do recovery from that lightweight appliance running in Amazon. And you also have, once you're ready to come back on premise, once the customer has recovered or has an alternate location for a vCenter, they'll have the ability now to fail back using an orchestration process as well. Now, like all things, the time to do that, if I'm coming out of Amazon and going back on premise to vSphere, I've got conversion, I've got data movement, all those sort of things play into it. But it gives me the ability, when you think about, the building is burned down and we're now in a situation where we have to be running in the cloud, we have to solve for all of the connectivity and client access and all the things that are required for that. But we now have the ability to move you back on premise in an orderly fashion and not have to do things like reset your infrastructure and then go back and do rollback recovery operations.
So
Okay?
when you do go back, for example, is the process incremental changes get synced into it or just it's a...
So what happens in today, we will do an orchestrated shutdown of your instances in AWS. We will begin the connection and brokering, stand up some data ingestion points in your target vCenter that can be preset in terms of data stores and networks. And then we get the rehydration brought across. We're taking a snap down, convert, and send back to vSphere. That's done in AWS. And it is disruptive. We don't have today the capability for you to do a non-disruptive immediate failback or vMotion between AWS, obviously, and on-premise. Right?
Haven't perfected magic?
I have not yet. We're working on it. We've got unicorn spears and Bigfoot
The
eyelashes.
disruption is understandable, of course, but the process is automated for the customer.
Yeah.
So they right-click or say, move it back.
It should be, again, triggering that through the failback operation capability. You've got your appliance connected in and is aware of your resources. You're able to go in and trigger that failback, get the shutdown done, broker the connection back on premise. Right? And then there's monitoring, obviously, status, where we are on the progress bar, which could be fast or it could be really slow, depends on what kind of pipe you're coming back on. So,
Yeah, but
And is
Never
there
mind.
quality of service for how much bandwidth to use?
so QoS is not something we're going to deal with from our side. We're doing everything we can to do compression and reduction when we're doing transmit in. If your customer needs to apply QoS on top, we're not going to argue with it, right?
Really sorry,
It's
Steve,
going to
we're still
adhere.
going to have to deal with the network guys.
It would, we'd love to give you we don't have to talk to the network anymore, but I mean, the reality is obviously we've got to deal with that. So,
One other question on the transit. Is it encrypted in flight? Okay.
absolutely. So when you look at on-premise into the public cloud, all of our products by default are going to have encryption in flight, and the data that is being written into the buckets is encrypted as well, right? That's just table stakes when we're going to public cloud. We don't send your raw data out there and have an open S3 bucket to the internet, right? So again, security baked into this, flowing downstream from what we already have in the data protection appliance and then moving out into the cloud. Okay. So the app consistent orchestrated DR allows us to expand on this use case, take advantage of the same infrastructure, but giving you more flexibility. The VM baseline standard cloud DR operation and policies is crash consistent VM image backup. Okay, that's what's supported. It's taking VM image from the IDPA or from our on-premise solutions and giving you capability to fail into the cloud. That doesn't necessarily address every use case for customers. You may have a broader ecosystem. You may have whatever workloads you've got out there. We can add now the capability to get plugin based application aware protection using the same technology, using the IDPA that we've talked about and that ecosystem that we have on premise against your virtual machine estate, and allow you now to do efficient replication. We do augment this now. Rather than using the S3 footprint, we are going to be taking advantage of a combination of our software, Avamar and Data Domain, running as virtual machine instances in the public cloud. Now, we're getting a trade-off on efficiency and scale there, but by using the current code for Data Domain, which can now take advantage of object storage for 90% of the active tier deduplication pool that you need to work with behind the Data Domain, we can preserve some of that cost to serve efficiency that you see with consuming object, while still providing you dedupe efficiency, scale, and the feature functionality that you gain with the IDPA and our technology. Okay?
So today it looks like the external target is for AWS. Do you guys intend to add Google and Azure?
So there is
that?
roadmap today, and we are about to go into beta to support Azure.
Okay.
Google has been the low-hanging fruit, realistically lower in the list, if you will, just because of enterprise adoption. We certainly have customers that are aggressively stepping into that, and we're having to evaluate as we go forward support for those things. So Azure is in the pipe today, in the roadmap, and we're evaluating alternate clouds as well.
Maybe to add on to that, once those capabilities are there for multiple external public cloud targets, do you guys intend, are you thinking about the ability to take a single VM or application set and kind of fan it out to all three for those customers that want an additional set of protections and maybe they have services out of various clouds?
Right.
We see that a lot with customers are placing their data in various different public clouds or external service providers, and they end up starting as a DR or recovery effort, but then it turns into building services on there because of the gravity of that data.
Right. So I'm going to have to defer to product management on that. As far as I know, we're again focusing on the on-prem to cloud single target. The fan out is certainly something that if we have customer interest in that, the technology should be able to support it. It's not being developed today.
Okay.
One other question about operations here, because a lot of this is about making things easier for the customer who's using it.
Right.
And one thing that I often see is that when two mechanisms are actually accessing a particular storage environment, so for example S3 where you're saving these images, what about access? So an admin typically would have access to an S3 environment. Is the S3 bucket that you use, how access is controlled? So I would normally, in AWS, first of all, restrict it that if someone hasn't used MFA or two-factor authentication, they can't even get to the storage environment.
Right.
So first of all, that level of protection. But also, when the administrator does get to it, they can actually independently go and delete things from there. Okay, they shouldn't be doing it, I know.
Understood.
But if they do it,
Right.
is it visible? Can they do it? And if they do, how does the system cope with it? Does it actually reconcile all the differences? Does it not let them do it?
Right.
So that kind of thing.
So out of the box, the default, we have a policy that will be applied. The on-prem appliance accesses the bucket, that and the CDRS, right? There's no, out of the box, here's admins also have this access and can go in and manipulate it. Now, obviously, if your IAM policies are allowing your admins to go tinker with things that they shouldn't be tinkering with, then we are in a situation where conceivably you could have a problem out there, right?
Normally, they are allowed to tinker with it. It's just
Understood.
that your S3 bucket might be an exception
Right.
where we wouldn't want them to.
Right.
So what would you advise? Is it something that technology would actually prevent them doing so they don't get access to it directly? Or they do get access to it directly, you just advise not for them not to tinker?
So
Because this
we're
is
not preventing the access today. Again, the IAM policy that we provide, it grants only the permissions required for the CDRA to access the resources, but we don't control your IAM policy from our solution. We consume pieces of that infrastructure, ideally in alignment with your security controls. Certainly something we should probably take back around what can we do from a worm-type behavior when you look at that so that we're not modifiable, but not in the product stack today.
And a lot of that's really AWS, not you.
Exactly.
Once it's there, you don't have control over those
Right.
permissions, AWS does.
And again, it's one of those things that kind of like some of the other conversations we've had, during the sessions where there's a point at which when we step into public cloud, we're now having to rely upon your public cloud operations team to be behaving themselves and doing things the proper way within that security context.
But the thing is that, what the point also I'm making is that, yes, administrators shouldn't be going and doing it,
Right.
but also...
But how do we recover if
accidentally,
if it is done, right?
So if you've set a policy where the admin can't actually delete it, and now if they go and maliciously try to, add up themselves to be able to delete, that's a deliberate act, of course. But sometimes mistakes also happen.
Yep.
But also, the system should be able to cope with it.
Yes.
I.e., if the new inventory after the deletion, whatever it is, should then reflect in your, that's easy enough to do. So if something's got deleted, your system should be able to actually cope with it and say, okay, this object disappeared, this is the new state.
Right.
So that's again the question, that does your interface actually then cope with it?
So one of the things that this is doing is based on the policies of how many copies you want to send out there, it's going to be sending in. So if somebody does go in and delete it, we will be then sending up the copies to follow that policy as a whole. But I guess to your point is saying, hey, they deleted copy from 4 days ago, for example, send that copy back up now because it's no longer there. That's what you're kind of driving at is how, and that's actually good feedback. We'll take
Yeah,
that
but
up.
the
I
bigger
like that.
concern is one that you guys can't solve is
Yeah, well, that's
what happens when somebody breaks your AWS password or a disgruntled employee goes
Or-
in, and
or
then
you-
you
or you
then you
don't
can
have-
end up being code spaces and have all of your data deleted and go out of business.
or you don't have your buckets secured in the first place,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
they're open buckets. That's a whole other problem.
So from a workflow perspective and just in terms of monitoring that, just to go a little further down that path, there's a concept called compliance within the workflows. And all the assets that are being synced out there are being monitored. Are they healthy? Do we have a recoverable copy out there? The last copy, did it sync? And if you have something where a copy is gone, then that would trigger that alert where we would be realizing you're not in compliance. Additionally, we're monitoring that AWS space. For example, I was having to do some debugging the other day and working in a test dev environment, and I had to open up my S3 bucket so that I could get some logs because I had restricted access from inside my pod. I immediately received an alert within CDRA that, oh, by the way, you turned on public access on your S3 bucket. Bad idea. Fix that, please. Right?
Yeah, that's good.
So those type of monitoring and compliance, alerting, but not necessarily enforcement yet. And then trying again to make sure that when we do the sync process, we're validating that you have a recoverable copy. That also would allow us, to the flow upstream. If there's an issue trying to create the AMI, we would resync missing chunks and things like that. So, help? Okay, good. Want to quickly draw the architecture here on the app consistent recovery Note that we are now adding where we can communicate in standard mode just over public internet. We're doing secured S3 endpoint access. When we begin to put our data protection solutions and move Avamar data domain out into VPCs, we do not recommend or support exposing that to the public internet. We're now going to be leveraging the IDPA to Avamar data domain replication path, requires a VPN tunnel. Okay, you're going to have extend your data center, have it, maybe direct connect, whatever architecture you might be following, but you need to have a secured connection between those resources. They're not designed to be public internet, facing. Once you get that in, you have your public cloud footprint, and now we have the ability, when we need to do a trigger and fail in, to at that point read those VM images off of that dedupe storage out in public cloud, and then orchestrate both the creation of the EC2 instances, launch, and then if need be application level recovery into that. We have an association process that you can map both your on-premise image-based backup and your agent-based backups to make sure we have the resources aligned, and we can then trigger those recoveries as part of that DR plan. Support the rapid launch capability as well, so that we can pre-stage incrementally that AMI on a nightly basis to have it ready, and again, shorten that RPO RTO. Okay.
I have a very quick AWS specific question, which might apply to Azure as well later on.
Okay.
Do you also support or require to have an S3 endpoint in the VPC that you're sending the
Yes.
stuff to?
So the protection storage layer, and this is a little bit broader discussion around deployment of data domain in public cloud. We, again, now support capability for you to consume object. While you could conceivably route that to a public S3 endpoint from inside your VPC, recommendation is to create a VPC endpoint for your S3 so we're inside the data center, right, in the cloud.
So it's a recommendation, not a requirement.
You can take it as a requirement.
All right.
We're not going to stop you. There's certain things you unfortunately can do that don't make sense, like running naked down the middle of the street here. But we have a strong recommendation and guidance on that.
No, of course.
So, yeah. All right.
From a provider perspective, right? Using data domain on premises, and then the DDV in AWS. Understand how licensing and purchasing works from that respect when you buy the physical infrastructure. On the DDV, if you have multiple customers, multiple VPCs, and subsequently a lot of DDVs, do those have to be managed individually? Are they licensed individually? Or is there like a large capacity license you can purchase and just kind of carve it up as needed per tenant?
Right. So the deployment does require you to assign a license and licensable capacity to the discrete appliances. There's not a central pool, right?
Per virtual appliance.
Per virtual appliance.
Okay.
However, from a licensing perspective, if you're a service provider, you absolutely can have a pool of capacity that can be drawn down and expanded against, right? So if you have a system, you deprovision, a DDV because you have offboard a customer, right? Then that can be simply put back into your pool and drawn down against, right? There's a very straightforward licensing allocation process for that. And at the time of the implementation, again, completely outside of this architecture, you have capability to deploy the appliance and then draw down that license.
Okay.
Right.
So to that point, you could procure 100 terabytes of DDVE licensing and then deploy it across the board wherever you choose. And then that customer leaves, I now reclaim that 5 terabytes of licensing and can go deploy somewhere else. Right. One of the things that this is more focused on Cloud DR, but since we're on the data domain virtual side, you can deploy it as a VM instance, you can deploy it as a Hyper-V, deploy it as a KVM, and they're deployable through the marketplaces as well.
Right.
And when you deploy them in the public cloud, now they're on object. So not on block storage any longer, which is actually very substantial for our customer standpoint.
Right.
Make sense?
And walking forward from that, from an SP perspective, we do have the centralized management tools. If you are running multiple instances across multiple VPCs, but you have a common administrative access entry as a service provider, the tool set that we use for multi-systems administration can certainly run in public cloud. It can be extended from your on-premise into public cloud. All of that is just dependent on IP communication and security, right? Including even things like the system manager you saw that is deployed with IDPA and a broader Dell EMC DPS ecosystem that can be used, again, external to those appliances as a multi-system manager, right? So again, taking that consistency of management and simplicity hopefully upstream further into the stack.
Do you have some sizing recommendation, or is it deployed in a HA configuration, the supplement?
Sizing for
Yes.
the solution as a whole. So from a perspective of the advanced, so go back to standard mode, we have sizing recommendations. We can take what your workload looks like on premise. We can give you an estimate on what's going to be consumed on the S3 side. We have a fixed EC2 instance size. and a RDS cluster for some metadata, very lightweight. I mean, pennies or less per month from a cost perspective for that. And then for the conversion process, that is an auto-scaling group that will spin up at the time of conversion, and then when we're done doing a fail-in or fail-back, we kill that, take that out of the way. From the advanced mode, we are going to go through a sizing exercise and understand what workload you're going to be putting out there. We'll give you the recommendations for that footprint, and then, of course, you'll have a Cloud DR components as well. The thing that will be subtracted from that, of course, is the object storage consumption that's used in native mode and the basic mode where we're just writing those images into just an S3 bucket versus having it front-ended with data domain. Make sense? And from a sizing perspective, this goes back to some of the things that Emmett brought up. We have very robust, broad experience in sizing and looking at our solutions. We have lots and lots of metrics coming home from our deployed systems across the world, tens of thousands of them. So we have a lot of data to work from. So no, we probably can't dial it in within 5% over 3 years because your customers don't know what they're going to be doing in 5 years. But we can absolutely give estimates on, and hopefully very accurate estimates.
What you need to do is you need to send a really clear alert that 90 days from now, because that's how long it takes purchasing to get the
and the native tools that we kind of looked through from a reporting and capacity management perspective, all of those things include the capability to do historical analytics and looking at trending from a capacity perspective. It's a very straightforward setup to have that running on a frequent basis, and you can look, here's my threshold where I know I've got my wall to go.
I have dealt with way too many backup administrators where no news is good news. I need an alert. You need to send me an email.
Right. And again, it's just a matter of having that configuration set up, right? So that we are monitoring and watching against that, and that's part of our process for deployment, things like that.
In fact, for you guys, have it send an email to the sales guy too.
So from that perspective, we did kind of glance over it, but in that actual management tool that Rango went through, there is here's when the date at which you will be full. And to that point, to put in place the trigger of 90 days from now, flashing red, you're going to be full from that perspective as well. Very critical there. So you're absolutely right. And we've seen that time and time again of, we're at 85 already? Wait, what happened?
Yeah.
So making sure that
my data didn't dedupe as well as I expected it to. Crap.
All of a sudden somebody started sending compressed data here and it filled up much faster than we expected, right? So exactly.
My favorite was the day somebody sent an email and said, there's a virus. Everybody back up your laptop to the file server.
Never happens. Going to touch on going past that, and are there any other questions on the orchestration?
I have a very deep question about how data is stored in the cloud, but I'll let you guys decide when it's appropriate.
Not a problem. So let me get through this real quick. We've got a short demo, and then let's take a couple of questions before we transition back to on-prem for vCloud Director.
What's that?
So when we move into recovery into VMC, we're obviously in a little simpler architecture here. I don't have to have the ability to go do translation because I'm already working on a native vSphere environment in public cloud. So all we have at this point is the need to do the policy-driven writes into an S3 bucket that's attached and accessible to your VMC data center. And then the ability, as needed, we will be able to spin up a CDRA in that environment, the broker appliance, and directly pull those images from that S3 storage and drive them directly into your VMware footprint, okay? From an architecture perspective, again, standard day-to-day runtime, we don't even care if you actually have a VMC VPC. We're simply set up and we're doing disaster recovery into AWS. We're storing those images. Then when you're ready to connect, if you've already got your VMC data center running, your SDDC, great, go ahead and connect that. Alternately, if you decided we have to spin that up at DR time, then you can now connect and plug those together. At that point, we simply do a read of those images, drive them in, create and configure the virtual machines, and bring them online. The time to do that is just the time it takes to read that in and rehydrate that image out of that bucket and get that stood up and running. Right? So very straightforward operation, very simple, and giving you a direct into the cloud capability. And my eyes are not seeing what my last arrow is there. Orchestration features we have added. Initially, this was a really fairly basic workflow. You selected your resources, you set your policy, and then it was a click 1, 2, 3 times to get the instance running. We have added the capability now for you to, again, bring up the rapid recovery, pre-stage your AMIs, make sure those are updated nightly, and making sure that we alert you if you're not in compliance and you don't have a current copy. And then the DR plan is the ability for you to predefine the sets of virtual machines that you want to do a failover on. And that can then be used for either the DR test, where we bring things online temporarily, we monitor and run them, and then can terminate them, or doing a full failover and then orchestrating your failback. Right? We can predefine, again, you can have predefined network and security groups. You can use existing ones if they're present in your VPC. So flexibility there. And then again, that capability to do test, you get promotion into a failover and then continue monitoring and operating until you're ready to do failback. Right? The compliance recommendations, the use recommendations, again, are baked into that user experience. So alerting you if you have something that's out of compliance, something that needs to be addressed to make sure you have recoverability. So I'm going to quickly do a demo. We're going to see if this is going to work in my lovely UI here. So I'm going to walk through this in just a couple of minutes, and it'll show you hopefully some of the user experience in flight. If you have questions, feel free to interrupt. So we've got the architecture we've already seen. This is, again, going into VMC. This is for the newest use case that we have, driving the capability to get that replication done. You go into your user experience. We go through and set your policy, define the systems that you're going to use from a backup group perspective. Simple policy-driven controls like you talked with Ranga. There's a checkbox, cloud DR integration, number of copies to keep, and making sure my compliance, my SLO is what's the oldest I'm going to allow my copies to be maintained before we start throwing an alert. Now we're in the cloud DR appliance. We're out looking at that CDRS instance. We're able to now see that we have an image out and in the S3 bucket ready for recovery. Right? Again, compression, encryption, control pane. You go in, get ready to spin up your SDDC. Right? This again could be done prior to configuring this replication or post. SDDC deployed, accelerated magic time. It's amazing how fast it happened in the demo. We're up and ready. You deploy your CDRA into VMC. Okay, there is that requirement there. That's the broker that can read your S3 buckets and orchestrate the VMs, getting your mappings for resources. Right? You connect into your SDDC vCenter. You have your cloud account for your bucket, your S3. You've got your specified cloud DR server, which is your broker from on-prem. You connect into your vCenter. Okay? The difference being when you look at, the VMC operations, because we're not doing that cross-platform recovery operation, we do have a flag that we can set, which you'll see here in just a moment, where we allow a direct recovery to a vCenter versus doing the conversion process and expecting to land in AWS. Enable direct failover. We select which data storage we're going to drive into, what network, IP range, and number of IPs, subnet mask, basic setup, right? So that we make sure that we have capability to communicate. Turn on the flag to allow, again, direct failover from those buckets into that vCenter versus going into AWS. Right? You select your image. You have the options you can see for test and failover, and then we've added, once you're enabled in that mode, to drive recovery to VMC. Right? Just adds an additional UI option, and now you can drive that forward.
So what steps does it do for the test?
I'm sorry?
And so when you're doing a test, what process, does it do everything but the translation, or?
So it will do everything. It just brings your instances up the same way that you would do for a failover or for a recovery operation, but it just puts it in a state where we're still monitoring and managing that, and we're going to alert you that you're in a test mode. You're consuming resources in that SDDC, but other than that, it looks exactly the same. Now, you could absolutely, for your test versus a failover, have discrete maybe data stores or discrete networks, right?
That's where I was
You
trying
can
to go.
pre-select those in your DR plan and have that available, absolutely. Have the VM ready, and we're in the process of doing
You guys are
orchestration.
doing half the work of building that sandbox to make sure that my 3-tier application actually runs and restore. Okay.
And again, monitoring visibility into the instance name that you're running with a VM name, of course, in SDDC, oversight on what's going on, and then you'll notice you have the capability to do, cancel something. If we inadvertently triggered a recovery and we're in process, we can kill that. The ability, again, to monitor and manage this through the event logs and understanding what's going on. You have historical reporting available on this as well, right? And now you have the VM up and rolling. So some differentiation on this, again, got multiple options for recovery, extending the value prop of your data domain, architecture, and our software, IDPA, and hopefully giving you some flexibility. So you said you had a deeper question on the recovery process.
Not on the recovery process, but on the data storage.
Okay.
If I'm doing use S3 as my offsite, and so all my data is going there, and relatively short retention, as I would in that case,
Right.
how do you guys do garbage collection in S3?
So we'll have the initial incremental copy, the full copy that goes out,
Yeah,
compressed and stored.
right,
And then we're picking up just deltas through the day.
right,
And then
but,
as we expire, when you get to retention process, right, we're going to go through and flag blocks that are not needed for day 31 that we just rolled off. We need day 1 through 30.
so
fire that.
so every dedupe block is an independent object in S3?
So we're not doing actual dedupe with CDRA. It's picking up and you've got your initial VM that has been
Right,
read off.
I'm not on CDRA.
Sorry.
If we're doing data domain virtual in the cloud is the question.
No.
you're-
If I've got a DR4400 on site. I've said every backup of my VMs goes to S3 because I only have one data center, and if it burns down, I need my data.
Right,
I'm doing 30 days retention because I have real archives separate.
right.
So there's a lot of data being deleted from day 31 on, and there are deduplication blocks that are no longer in use. And I don't want to pay the S3 charge for keeping all of that data, so you guys have to do garbage collection. And I'm interested in how that happens.
So in that, can you use your microphone?
Sure. I'm sorry.
Oh, the mic, sorry.
So from a perspective of, again, we roll off and look at whatever unique chunks were sent in for that incremental backup that we're expiring.
Right.
We're maintaining the original full for the life cycle of that
Yeah.
instance out there, right? And so we're going to mark for expiration and deletion just the blocks that are not being referenced.
Yeah, but marking them doesn't save me any money. You have to actually delete them.
And so
And if so, I mean, you could do it by having every 16 to 64K deduplication block be an independent object and then go, the use counter on this block went to 0, I'll delete the object. But very small objects in S3 don't get along very well.
Understood.
So if your objects are 1 megabyte and 400K of that 1 megabyte are dedupe blocks that have 0 uses,
Right.
how do you garbage collect?
right. So it's going to be once we've expired the data in the object and removal of that.
Well,
I'm gonna
that's
actually-
all the data in the
Right.
object.
Correct.
But-
And again, thinking that this is a little bit different than data domain, for example, this is not, again, deduplication chunks. We've rehydrated and picked up delta data blocks when we're moving into the S3 footprint. There's not a global dedupe. We're doing compression only when you write in,
So the data stored in S3 is compressed but not deduplicated.
compressed but not deduplicated. Right.
On the Cloud DR side.
Cloud DR
when it's
side.
standard. If we're using a data domain virtual instance
Yeah.
out there, that's.
Well, then it does the deduplicate.
And then,
It does
yes,
the,
and that's running the active tier on objects, so the objects where the bucket is, but then we also have a small footprint. Basically, think of it like the controller.
right, but if I'm archive tiering and I'm doing 1 year retention and it's the end of 1 year, data has to be deleted from S3.
Correct.
And-
And so in that specific use case, when we started talking about the data domain integration versus Cloud DR, we are doing deduplication with recent code updates and a new release of DD Virtual Edition that is public cloud friendly. We've increased the object size that we write and the way we maintain our storage. We've also changed the way that we're handling things like metadata on the data domain to make better, more cost-effective use of that object store. Because the initial release, we did have some issues with consumption, metadata overhead, and things like that were causing challenges from a cost perspective,
but-
cleaning up and things like that.
But I'm still, I've got the appliance, I'm tiering to S3, eventually that data expires. And
And that same garbage collection process that we do for on-premise applies into that cloud tier. We're going to, if you expire
But I don't,
13 months.
and if I have a data domain VE in EC2, then there's a lot of traffic between that EC2 instance and S3. But if I don't, and all my data domain code is running on-prem,
So it makes.
it could get really ugly sucking all the data back down and sending it back up because the deduplication process is happening in my data center, but the data's in S3.
So this is something actually we need a little broader and maybe a deeper
I told you guys it
conversation.
was deep.
No, absolutely.
I warned you.
And this is touching stuff that's actually outside of some of the things we're looking at because it's ways that we're handling cloud tier because we're absolutely cognizant of the fact that when I move into public cloud, I can't be doing expensive full crawls of 6 petabytes of long-term retention data, right? We have to be very intelligent about how we handle that. So there's some under the hood components in data domain that facilitate a much more efficient use of that for things like garbage collection and cleaning for expired data that is cloud tiered. Okay. Love to actually have another
Yeah,
conversation on that if we can.
let's set up a brief for that.
Yeah, because it's one of those things that we've obviously had to deal with, right? We can't simply replicate what we're doing on premise when we start going into by the drip consumption in public cloud. We can, but people won't be able to use our products.
And that's exactly to your point is we've done a lot of things to enhance that efficiencies and to make sure that there's not that additional overhead and you're not having to pay for that as well as part of it as a customer. So we should definitely do a deeper dive into that specifically for sure.
Yep.
Okay. So with that said, is there any other questions on the cloud DR components? Interesting?
Yes.
Something that you see, the broader ecosystem having a use for?
Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
definitely. And one thing that I would say in the end is that I think it'll be useful for you to not just wait, just bring other clouds on board as soon as you can, because other companies are also doing it. And obviously, when someone is coming up with their strategy, which product they're going to go for, then it'll be for them to be, if your product to be in the running, they would like to know that you are supporting them now, or
Yes.
at least in the near future,
Absolutely.
before making that decision.
And Taranga's point is something that we have been aggressively pursuing, trying to address, as customers have shifted and it's been coming, and of course it is now a tidal wave, right? And we're trying to get, caught up with that and maintaining currency and feature functionality in a simple, hopefully, way to consume, addressing some of the challenges that we've discussed here today.